Attention, please. Would members of the Community Development and Recreation Committee please report to Committee Room 1 for quorum? Thank you.
All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 16th meeting of the Community Development and Recreation Committee. Special welcome to members of the committee and members of the public, of course, who are here to watch the proceedings and possibly depute. From those in the back in the room with us, the screen at the back of the room provides real-time updates concerning where we are on the agenda and what's coming up next. And of course, you can always follow the agenda and debate on your computer, tablet, or smartphone at toronto.ca/council. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? There are none. Can I have a motion to confirm the minutes of October 20th, 2016? Just confirming the minutes. Yes. Councillor Mihevc, all those in favor? It's carried. So we have the agenda before us. There's a few items that we're going to deal with quickly. I think one is being withdrawn. We'll come to that in a minute. One is being deferred. CD 16.1, City of Toronto Basketball Development Plan. It's being held. 16.2, full-day kindergarten and school-age program updates. Deputants, we're going to hold that for deputants. 16.3 also has deputants. We'll hold that. 16.4, review of city's obligations and requirements under Toronto's municipal shelter bylaw. There's also a deputant for that. We'll hold it. 16.5, changes to social housing ministerial consents. We have a motion to withdraw.
Oh, I was, really? Okay.
Yeah, we're going to discuss this in the first quarter of 2017, probably in January. So I have a motion here to withdraw the item.
I'm happy to withdraw it.
Staff have requested.
I don't think this committee would give delegated authority to staff to sell housing, which
Yeah,
ask is
there were
for, so-
raised eyebrows when this was
rather
seen, so
precipitous, and I'd really like to know how it got onto this agenda, actually.
it came as a bit of a surprise, but I think the solution now is to withdraw and let staff reorganize and regroup and come back in
I
January.
hope they're not coming back with the same recommendation, Mr. Chair.
I believe the whole intention here is to withdraw it and have them rework the recommend.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a motion to withdraw the item. All those in favor? It's carried. (16.6), we have deputation, so we'll hold that item.
Mr. Chair, just as a sidebar, perhaps at the end of the, going through the agenda, a few of the folks on that who have deputed can only really stay for the first hour, and they're wondering whether they could be placed first on the agenda.
Well, if we want to time items, let's go through the agenda, see what we're up against,
Yep.
and we'll deal with it in a couple of minutes. CD 16.7, changes to Toronto Employment Social Services Orthopedic Benefits Operation Policy. I have had a request from stakeholders to defer the item to the January 16, 2017 Community Development Recreation meeting. So this is a defer, we'll defer. 16.7, all those in favor? That's carried. I'm hearing strange voices. Okay, Councillor Mihevc. Oh, we do have a walk-on item. I hope everybody's taken a look at it. It's from Vice Chair. Sorry, I missed a page here. Sorry, 16.8.
I'm going to hold that.
Held by Councillor Fletcher. 16.9. Move the recommendation. Councillor Fletcher moving the recommendation. All those in favor? Carried. And 16.10, allocations, recommendations, and there is one deputant, so we will hold that item. Now I'll go back to what I was saying a minute ago. There is a walk-on item from Councillor Fletcher. I'm new business. Need a motion to add that to the agenda. Councillor Mihevc, all those in favor? It's carried.
Yes.
All right.
And you're holding it.
I'd like to deal with that first thing if we can.
Yeah.
Okay, City of Toronto Basketball Development Plan. First item on the agenda.
Mr. Chair, can I move a motion to move 16.6 to the top of the agenda, as I suggested before?
It's my understanding that item 16.1 will be very quick. We have multiple PFR staff here who,
Okay, so after 16.
I'd be happy to move, 16.6 after 16.1,
Sounds great.
okay? City of Toronto Basketball Development Plan.
Why don't we hear from those deputants that have to leave?
No,
No, basketball is considered a fairly quick item.
No, I understand on the other item. That's fine.
Well, on the 16.6, we will do that next, and we will have deputants up there in a few minutes.
Okay.
Questions for staff?
On the basketball strategy, I think one of the things that I'm just going to be concerned about, and I think it's great to have a basketball strategy, but as a barrier to employment, there's a lot of youth, particularly in Toronto community housing, that now have a street check or have a small criminal record, and they're unable to get into employment. Is that not the case? Is that still the case?
Through the chair, the policy you're referring to is a corporate policy around criminal records check that PFNR follows along with many other divisions.
And we've, in the past, asked about that as being an impediment to employing youth that may have, run into a little bit of trouble, and now they're basically unable to be employed through the city. Are you aware of that request?
It's, it's not something that's specifically part of the basketball development plan. If it's an issue around, youth employment and the city's employment policies, I think that would be a separate thing than this. We currently employ many, many youth, and we follow the policies, as required under the sort of directions.
Just,
So I couldn't speak, directly on how much of an impediment it is without, doing some fairly substantial sort of research and outreach.
so really, with this basketball plan, we're trying to up basketball as a major part of our recreation planning and have it delivered in a little more professional way. Would you agree with that?
Through the chair, that's correct. Howie may want to add. I think part of what we discovered in putting the plan together is that there's a lot of basketball going on in the city, but there hasn't been a real coordinated effort around integrating some of those strategies so that we can deliver the best that we can, and also provide some developmental capacity building resources to the groups that are already delivering it in the community.
So some of those people could be those who are delivering programs, but maybe not through the city.
Correct.
But who wouldn't be able to work for the city because of our criminal background check policy.
I couldn't speak to that directly. I wouldn't know.
I know you don't think they're related. I do believe they're related. So I'm wondering what's happened to that report back. I'll ask the Deputy City Manager. A number of years ago, this committee, maybe not that many years ago, I think it was Mr. Berlinger undertook to indicate how we might be able to look at the impact of that policy as far as not being able to hire youth from our own communities to work for PFNR who have had, insignificant run-ins with the law, but are now unable to work. And that was a change in policy. So while we're bringing forward this strategy, I think it is important that I know the answer to that. Where are we at with shifting that for hiring for youth at PFNR?
Through the
chair, I'm not aware of a review issue. I'd have to look into it and get some more information and report back.
There was a review requested. I know, because I requested it, so.
I'll have to follow up, and we'll get back. I can provide an update at our next meeting.
That would be very good then.
Okay?
Thank you. Good. In that case,
Councillor Cole.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I was recently at one of the PFNR basketball drop-ins in my community at the former Sir Sanford Fleming in Neptune, and I think there were that hour or two I was there were about 80 kids crammed into a gym, and even the growth in the girls' basketball was so much that they were kind of asking for other permitted hours in that school. And I guess my question is, considering how many TDSB and TCDSB gyms sit dark every night, and I can just speak to my ward alone with about 7 or 8 schools potentially on the block for closure. I don't see in this report how we intend to better leverage all those courts that are sitting there, because to me that's the most fundamental piece of any strategy, is just giving young people, old people, whoever it is, a safe place to play.
Through the chair, so we've had conversations with TDSB and TCDSB as part of the reference group in putting this plan together, and certainly from the reference group, access to gyms came up. So both from the perspective of how do the community groups access those gyms and understand the permitting process, because as you said, those are largely their assets. And so part of our commitment is to work with them in terms of trying to streamline the processes, work with them in terms of accessing what gyms are available. And then part of our own ongoing program review is to take a look at where we're providing drop-in based programming. If we're oversubscribed, can we review our mix, add some gym time, trying to, spread out the number of kids that are available. So that's all part of the conversation that we're having with our own staff as well. And then finally, alignment with the master plan is important in terms of identifying where are there actual space gaps that we've got in terms of not enough gyms, we're maxed out, and we need some additional sport-based facilities, and that will inform that 20-year capital plan.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, in terms of that kind of second pillar of what you discussed and just the ability for the city or PFNR to just permit more of that space to add more capacity, I just don't see which recommendation advances that objective so that 6 months, a year from now, we could say to our communities or the city at large, no, we as a partner are more aggressively permitting space, and we're going to have double the amount of gym hours versus what we have now, or whatever the target may be.
Well, we can certainly take that offline and make sure it's reflected, but when we look at, number D in terms of establishing entry points for, basketball, like, drop-in informal play is absolutely part of that. In terms of looking at some of our underrepresented groups in G and making sure that we're being intentional around how we do that and what additional programming we may need to do. And then obviously trying to leverage the expertise of the basketball network themselves, because we don't want to be duplicating things that they're doing is part of, I'd say, H and any of them that speak to capacity building. So it's inherent in the plan, but if it's not specifically spelled out sufficiently, we can take that back to make sure it's clear as we report back on our success.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Cole. Councillor Fletcher has asked for an additional question, which is fine.
It's just got to do with outdoor courts and how many we have in parks, because I would think that would be part of our overall basketball strategy. They're very popular.
We're looking for that information. I'm not sure we have it handy.
Okay.
But certainly I can get it to you. But I know, outdoor basketball is certainly part of what we're looking at, not just in this strategy, but also as we develop more outdoor space in parks.
So if we were to ask for you to let us know where they are, I know I have two that are tremendously popular, and then there's the 3-on-3. Let's just say, where are we looking at siting? Where are some options to site 3-on-3 courts in the city?
We can have a look at that.
Can we bring that back here, or would you like to take that to council? How would you like to do that?
Whatever your preference, I think it's, we'd have to have a look at, where they all are and put a map together of all the outdoor courts. There's different kinds of courts. There's tennis courts that are sometimes converted and multi-use courts that have those uses as well. So it's a fairly comprehensive report. We can do that if
So
with the
could you
interest.
bring that back in Q1 then and let us know where those outdoor courts are? Is that enough time, or you need Q2?
Yeah, Q2 would probably
Q2,
be more.
I'd like Q2, okay. Council would be a bit fast then.
Yes, it
The
would.
13th, okay, all right, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Any other questions for staff? Speakers list? Speakers, Councillor Cole?
I have an amendment, so I don't know if there's anyone else who wants to quickly speak, and maybe you can praise staff while I just give this to clerks, Mr. Chair.
Do you need a couple of minutes?
Yeah, like one or two.
I have a motion. I'd be prepared to move mine now, unless others would like to speak. Okay, you have a motion as well. Is it ready? No, you're working on it now. Okay, so since mine's ready to go, I would ask the clerk to put it on the screen. This is asking the General Manager, Parks, Forestry and Recreation to explore private sector partnerships and/or sponsorships to ensure the success of the basketball development plan. We have an extremely active corporate neighborhood in Toronto regarding athletics and sports. They are extremely robust when it comes to supporting various activities in their business model. Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment and the Raptors clearly are opportunities there. And not only does Corporate Canada want to get involved in community projects, they have an obligation to get involved. So I'll move that to make sure that we invest more energy into our partnership office. I would simply thank staff for the work they're doing on this. I think that some of the things that are coming out of PFR these days are clearly transformative, and getting people off the couch, away from the computer, and onto our basketball sport courts is commendable. Based on the timeline of growth of the interest in basketball, I think there's two main factors. One is, of course, is the coming of the Raptors, Raptors to Toronto, as well as many new Canadians who have taken up the sports. It's fairly accessible. It's easy to get going. I see the basket courts constantly used in Ward 10. It's very exciting to see people out getting exercise and fresh air. Of course, there's indoor courts as well. So with that, I'm done. And Councillor Cole, I trust your motion is done. Councillor Fletcher?
The clerk has my motion. I'll just speak to that. Do you want to wait for a second, or
Feel free to speak, and then
it can go up? It's not a big, controversial motion. It's just to ask that by the end of Q2 that we would have an understanding where the current courts are. Go out and check park by park. I guess I know where they are in my ward. And then what some of the potential locations might be and what the parameters might be. So I know that there have been a number of small courts in my ward that I've had to remove the basketball hoops because they're right behind someone's house. And because they're open, they're playing all night. So it's not easy to get new locations that don't disturb the neighbors. Jimmy Simpson has the most fantastic 3-on-3 court. People play all the time. There's nobody disturbed. Joel Weeks Park has a long-standing, huge basketball court that's been there for a long time. People come from a lot of places to play there. Nobody is disturbed. So, and then with the roof at Greenwood, there have been basketball nets that were built in as part of that, but they have to be brought up because if they're down, they'll be playing all night, and basketball is thumping all night long, and that is not a good thing. So indoor courts where it's just our gyms, that's fantastic, and I know everybody's interested in expanding that program. So I look forward to that, and I appreciate your undertaking for getting that back, so we have some idea and what good spots are and what some of the problem spots are, so that people aren't just putting in courts and then we find we've got a problem with its location, which, as you know, can happen. And so that is that motion. Also, I appreciate the Deputy City Manager undertaking to bring back that issue around who can be hired. That's been on our agenda for a while now, maybe even from last term, as an impediment to youth that may have made a little mistake, but really shouldn't be kept out of the system, kept out of working for the city as a great spot. And I see that was a big North York model of hiring disadvantaged youth, hiring kids from TCH. And when we put that corporate restriction on, it really did stop a lot of kids from entering really gainful employment and becoming good folks in the city of Toronto. So I am concerned about that, especially when we're talking about advancing and growing basketball. I want to make sure everybody has an equal chance to be part of the growth of that sport in the city. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Cole, is your motion ready?
I believe it is. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just while it's posted, I'll begin that, and I mentioned that in my question, I was recently at a PFNR drop-in, which is an amazing program we provide, and it's just some supervision in a gym. And I think that night there were 80 kids between the age of 15 and 19 there. And every one of them I spoke to just said, we need more hours, more gyms, more hours, more gyms, more hours, more gyms. And so if there is one fundamental thing we can do to increase participation it's that. And just I'll add as a side note, this is in the midst of what we've termed a stronger priority neighborhood that is devoid of almost any community facilities, and one where the school is often dark every night of the week, and there are these 80 kids, or maybe 100 even some nights, that otherwise would have nowhere to go. There is a community center in nearby Lawrence Heights. There is a sensitivity, though, where these kids will not travel to that neighborhood. So again, that is not available to them. And so I think the one fundamental thing we can do in terms of cost, too, compared to us building new facilities, or us trying to create programs from scratch, is providing these hours. And so I think that we need to not only look at the potential of doing this, but actually have some kind of metrics or targets by which we would see over time what we want to get to and what makes sense and what kind of capacity levels we'd want to get to. And so that's why I've just amended that Part D in the staff recommendations to actually having a plan that targets getting more capacity and hours in these schools.
Thank you, Councillor Cole. So there's a few motions. Can we take them as a package? We're good? Okay, all those in favor? It's carried. The item is amended. All those in favor? It's carried. Okay, as per Councillor Mahavic's request, we're doing CD 6.6, update on the delivery of Housing Stabilization Fund. We have a series of deputants here. So we'll start that right away. Joan Anderson. Great, thank you very much for coming. You have 5 minutes.
Good morning. My name is Joan Anderson. I'm project manager at the Toronto HIV/AIDS Network. I'm joined by a frontline worker, Rajesh Pishardi, income and community liaison at the Toronto People with AIDS Foundation. Housing is a basic need, a basic right, and a key to health. We're grateful for your support of the Housing Stabilization Fund, a critical program for housing stability and prevention of homelessness. We appreciate TESS's recognition of the need to make significant improvements, including eliminating the income test for people on ODSP and OW. That also includes ending the use of the Canada Child Care Benefit to determine income eligibility, and their commitment to reduce the overcomplicated requests for documentation that delay the process. All of this is good. There are questions about how some changes will work, and deep concerns remain about eligibility access to the fund, shared by other groups that will speak to you today. People need access, not barriers. Continued HSF underspending, makes no sense given the number of homeless and precariously housed in Toronto. For example, some applicants have to borrow money in order not to lose a rare opportunity for housing. The person is then denied HSF, although otherwise eligible. A loan is viewed as income, as problem solved, even if HSF response was delayed. But a loan is a debt, a liability, and a risk to keeping housing. Why wouldn't we find a way, a protocol, to help and prevent a return to homelessness?
The Housing Stabilization Fund is wonderful when it works. An HIV-positive client of mine, an immigrant, and a single mother with 3 children, 2 of whom are also HIV-positive, abandoned by their father who left the country, living in the suburbs, needed to live downtown in close proximity to their medical teams. The client had incurred significant rental arrears in the previous residence. HSF took care of the arrears, moving costs, and last month's rent at the new long-term stabilized house, which was safe and manageable, that was received by the client. But when HSF does not work, people are stuck in difficult, sometimes desperate situations. Service providers like myself struggle to help those facing domestic or physical violence, fires, floods, bed bug infestations, or a high rent situation, and even personal safety as relocation HSF criteria are too narrowly defined. Examples where I have tried to help people access HSF: an individual with HIV and mental health issues with a single room in a house, sharing a kitchen, fridge, and washroom with others. This is a daily challenge as it is hard to keep medical condition status confidential. For example, when incontinent or antiretroviral drugs need to be kept in the fridge. An applicant has been denied because the move to their own apartment involved a raise in rent, even at $36. Their lives continue to be difficult, stressful, harder to manage, nutrition, and the side effects of medication. Another example is a woman fearing for her own and her children's safety from a dangerous building with gunshots. They could move to a new space, but because rent is more, HSF is denied. Someone with a substance use issue has stopped using, but can't avoid his former dealer banging on the door where he lives, again denied. The city tries to make buildings safer, but in the meantime, why wouldn't we as a city help people who find an alternative to move away from terrible conditions and be safer, healthier, and have stable housing? This is the goal of the HSF. People denied when a life-changing opportunity is right in front of them is heartbreaking and unfair. We as frontline service providers struggle to find solutions. HSF needs to listen to and take into account the circumstances of people who reach out for help. The update on page 4 includes HSF provides resources to prevent evictions and assist OW and ODSP clients to obtain housing, retain their housing, or relocate to more appropriate or affordable housing. It is crucial to follow through on helping people in these situations to move to more appropriate and therefore more stable housing. With stable housing, people move from hopelessness to hopeful, to more than struggle and survival, and eventually to stability, safety, and growth. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Any questions for the deputy? Councillor Mihevc?
So do the recommendations here from staff allow for the flexibility, or are you saying that we need to even increase it further? And what area, like we need specificity.
Right. So I think there has been progress in terms of the eligibility piece and not putting through the people through the income test. However, we would like more review, more discussion and openness about other aspects of the eligibility criteria that we believe, and workers like Rajesh and individuals on these programs, they're just too narrow, too restrictive. It doesn't make sense that they're consistently under budget, not with the situations in Toronto.
So you don't have a specific piece, you're just saying go further, based on kinds
Absolutely.
of issues that people are facing.
And the two big examples around that are for relocation, when it's restricted to domestic violence or fire flood, or more what they call more affordable rent, which is really reduction in rent. But there are situations where somebody may need to pay a little bit more, but that's life-changing. And there needs to be more attention to the circumstances. So we don't want things to stop. We want, let's
Just
look
writing down what
more.
I think might help.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Mihevc, and thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Corinne Baki? Corinne Baki? Cole Weber? Oh,
Sorry.
thank you very much for coming. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Actually, good morning. My name is Mayuri Malankov, a student at law at the South Asian Legal Clinic of Ontario. I'm here on behalf of Corinne Becky, staff lawyer at Selco. She couldn't make it in today due to running late at an appointment. So you may already know that the South Asian Legal Clinic of Ontario is a Legal Aid Ontario-funded community legal clinic that provides legal services to low-income South Asians living in the GTA. We routinely represent individuals on social assistance, both Ontario Works and ODSP, in accessing basic income benefits. You may also know that Salco partnered with the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty in producing the report Left in the Lurch, the Destabilizing Reality of Toronto's HSF, in order to draw attention to what we've already discussed, our discriminatory and procedurally unfair practices. We are pleased to see the city's report that following repeated public actions by OCAP and other stakeholders, that TESS is responding to some of the human rights violations built into the HSF adjudication practices. And we're pleased to see that there is no longer an income, a separate income test, changing the criteria for furniture, documentation, possibly reducing the documentation needed to complete an application, and providing some level of transparency. The outstanding concerns that we have are, number one, retroactive HSF payments. So while the test has acknowledged the need to eliminate the requirement for a separate income test, which is welcome, effective December 15th, this doesn't address the needs of those already denied on discriminatory grounds. So those that were denied because they were found to have excess income because of the receipt of disability-related benefits, such as the SDA or GDA, or income to support child rearing, such as the CCB. So we are submitting that these persons must have the opportunity to have past adjudication revisited. The new policy doesn't absolve tests of discriminatory decision-making, which has already occurred. Also, the flat benefit structure. So TESS has announced the details will be shared with us on December 1st, 2016, which prevents us stakeholders from responding publicly today before you at the meeting. Certainly, TESS has begun formulating some type of structure, even if at a rudimentary stage, so we're asking why no further details are given in the report for action. Despite TESS's assurances that the majority of clients will either be better off or obtain the same benefit level, SALCO fears that SALCO fears that what will be proposed may render applicants with the greatest housing precariousness worse off. Especially in the absence of exceptions beyond domestic violence, many of our clients are persons with disabilities who require housing accommodations suitable to their specific needs. Also, the requirement, number 3, is a requirement of transparent process. HSF policies, including directives to TESS and ODSP staff, should be made fully transparent, as this is a publicly funded benefit. And finally, with regards to HSF eligibility, we're submitting that currently it's a very inflexible structure. Only the following OW and ODSP recipients may be eligible for the HSF. So people who are homeless and leaving an emergency shelter on the street, those who are housed and relocating within the GTA because of domestic violence, fire, flood, and those who are housed and relocating within the GTA due to a high rent situation. But this doesn't capture those who are not meeting the above. For example, the phenomenon of hidden homelessness, which includes people who are temporarily moving between family and friends, for example, couch surfing, or doubling up in hotels and hostels for lack of adequate housing. So in conclusion, SALCO supports the outstanding demands and recommendations made by OCAP, who will depute, and also it's imperative that TESS addresses all of the above in a transparent and timely manner. The safety and dignity of many Torontonians depends on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions for the deputant? No? Thank you very much. Cole Weber. Thank you for coming, Mr. Weber. You have 5 minutes.
I work at Parkdale Community Legal Services, which is one of the 14 community legal clinics in the GTA. I want to talk or give you 3 examples of problems that we've seen with Housing Stabilization Fund with clients that we've represented or are currently representing. So the first deals with the consequence of downloading the community startup benefit onto the municipalities. A homeless man in Toronto came to us who had secured accommodations in London, Ontario, and he applied for Housing Stabilization Fund here in Toronto. He was denied. Only after our organization assisted him in filing a review of the decision, and after prolonged legal advocacy was that decision ultimately overturned. And I think that begs the question of how many other homeless people who have not had the assistance of a legal clinic have been denied HSF assistance in securing housing outside of Toronto and have been forced to remain homeless as a result. The second deals with discrimination against families, and this is an ongoing case that's not been resolved. So we represent a mother of 4 children who fell into rental arrears and received an eviction notice from her landlord. She was denied Housing Stabilization Fund in paying off the arrears on the basis that she was financially ineligible. This is because the child tax benefit that she received was included in her assessment of income, but not considered in the corresponding assessment of her family's need. So normally this family pays $300 per month out of their basic needs allowance on top of their entire shelter allowance to make rent. And now, in order to avoid the eviction, she was forced to enter into a private repayment plan with her landlord. So now she's paying $400 of her basic needs allowance on top of her shelter allowance just to stay housed. And this is money that's coming directly out of her food budget for her kids. Last example sort of just highlights the arbitrary and rigid nature of the HSF criteria. We're representing a family where a 9-year-old and a 14-year-old child are both currently sleeping on toddler bunk beds. The family applied for HSF on the basis that they need beds for their kids, but they were denied, told that because there'd been no flood, no fire, or bed bug infestation, that they were ineligible for assistance for new beds. So, I mean, the fact remains that the children's sleeping arrangement is obviously wholly unacceptable and they require beds. We're representing that family in a request to review the decision, but it's not yet been resolved. So, Parkdale Legal has worked with OCAP and other groups from the outset of the Housing Stabilization Fund to fight for increased access to the benefit. We assist people in applying for HSF and in filing reviews. We're obviously in full support of the demands put forward by OCAP. We're pleased to see that the city staff are supporting many of those demands as well, but there are still questions. Councillor Mihevc had asked the previous deputant about specifics. I think it should be pointed out that never has TESS been clear about specifics. This policy has never been made public. The policy has been constantly shifting. The eligibility criteria have never been clear. It's always been very discretionary and all over the place in terms of how this policy is applied. So first of all, make the policy public. And there's a bunch of other questions in terms of coming out of the report, in terms of talking about soft furniture being provided for. What does that mean? Talks about a flat rate benefit structure, but there are no details provided in terms of what that's going to look like. In terms of people receiving funds in extraordinary circumstances, the only example given is domestic violence. There are other types of extraordinary circumstances that are not highlighted there in terms of disability accommodations and otherwise. There's some talk about lessening the sort of rigid and arbitrary requirements for documentation, but there's not that much detail given. In particular, the requirements currently in place around people providing documentation from their landlord about pest infestation is a massive barrier because landlords aren't required to give this to people. So even if people have had bed bug treatments in their unit, landlords under no obligation to provide them proof of that, yet HSF wants that before they're going to give people money for furniture or for beds. So these are some of the questions that come out of the report. There needs to be more work done by the city to make this fund available for people who need to secure or maintain their housing. We should be really clear that people have, for not being able to
You're well
access
past the
this
five.
fund,
If you could wrap up.
people have become homeless and people are forced into continued homelessness. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the deputant? No? Thank you very much. AJ Withers? Thank you for attending, Mr. Withers. You have 5 minutes.
Hi, my name's AJ Withers. I'm a PhD student studying poverty and a member of OCAP. I also lived on social assistance for a long time and used the community startup, which was necessary for my health and well-being as the HSF is today. So as people have said, there have been a number of changes that remove much of the overt discrimination against families and disabled people in the HSF policy. We commend that. We think that's a really good step forward. There are a number of issues that remain with the HSF. As people have said, making the policy public, this is essential for people to be able to apply and know what the standards are for the application and to be able to make any appeals if they're denied. A primary concern for us is the eligibility, and some people have touched on it, but one thing is just to add a criteria for people eligible on the basis of it being needed for their health, welfare, and/or safety. Health and welfare was a previous criteria under community startup benefit, and it's something that there are so many things that people cannot anticipate, and particularly with the HSF potentially going to a flat rate, there are so many things that people need that policies don't anticipate, and there needs to be room for people to be able to get those things. And this is sometimes the matter between life and death, between housing and homelessness, between going hungry and paying last month's rent. The definition of homelessness needs to be expanded. Currently, it's street homeless or in the shelter system. There are many, many people that are living in dangerous, really unacceptable, precarious or homeless situations, such as like sleeping on a different person's couch every night. If that person isn't sleeping on the street, they can't get the HSF, but clearly that person is homeless and needs the HSF. And then removing the requirement to move to a lower rent situation. As I'm sure people are aware, housing prices are skyrocketing. Just in the Metro today, they talk about the increase in housing. The average rent for a bachelor apartment is $957. It is only going up. Low-income housing is harder and harder to find. It's virtually impossible for anyone to move into a lower rent situation. And so it should just simply be moving into a situation that benefits the person would be a far better criteria than the current one. Things like you live next door to someone who's racist and is painting racist graffiti all over your apartment walls. You can't move and get the HSF under those circumstances. For me, I used Community Startup to get an electric can opener because I, for a number of years, wasn't physically capable of opening cans. And I'm sure in a flat rate system, there's not going to be any anticipation for people getting electric can openers because those aren't perceived as necessary items, but for many disabled people, they are. So there are a lot of problems with the rigidity of the current criteria. We're also deeply concerned that the policy remains discriminatory against disabled people and call on, as we shouldn't have to and never should have had to, the HSF policy to meet the Ontario Human Rights Code, and particularly with respect to eligibility considerations, application procedures, what is deemed essential furniture and household items, and if the flat rates are put in place, variations on those if accommodations are needed. Right now, there is no procedure for disabled people to be able to apply based on a necessary accommodation. And those things, they need to be clear and open. People need to be able to access those things without having to go to the Human Rights Tribunal. We're also deeply concerned about the flat rate system. It's our position that if you need something and the fund is available, you should be able to get that money. Right now, the only flat rates that exist under the HSF are for beds, and it's $300 for a single bed or $500 for a double bed. We contacted 5 of the biggest furniture sellers, low-income furniture sellers, and not one of them sold a bed, including tax and delivery, which almost everyone on social assistance requires delivery, for that price. The average single bed was $420, and the average double bed was $600. So if a flat rate is being established, A, is probably going to undercut those things, and people won't be able to actually access the necessary items that have been deemed necessary. B, it won't be fixed to inflation. And C, it won't deal with the actual lived realities for people. And then lastly, there's a criteria that people cannot get money for worn or broken furniture. So basically, if you have a table, it breaks.
If you could wrap up,
Yeah,
you're past the
absolutely.
5 minutes.
If it breaks,
Thanks.
you are only ever allowed one table in your lifetime, only ever allowed one bed in your lifetime unless a disaster happens. So there are a number of really fundamental problems that remain in this necessary benefit, and we call on you to require the test to make the necessary changes to make this a just policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions for the deputant? No? Thank you very much. Richard Dalton? Richard Dalton? John Clark? And Gina Lefebvre?
Thanks very much. Ms. Lefebvre is going to speak about the situation that she has found herself in, which I think is a very courageous and dignified act on her part. There's something about her situation that I think drives home many of the lessons that need to be learned here, but also drives home the fact that we're talking about people's lives. Ms. Lefebvre applied for the Housing Stabilisation Fund because she needed to move into a medically equipped unit. She received a payment that covered moving expenses, but the items she needed to establish that home were denied. When she appealed, the letter that came back referred to a medical bed that she had requested, but didn't mention any of the other items. And then suggested that she would not be eligible because she didn't meet one of the three grounds of leaving a shelter or the streets, relocating because of domestic violence, fire or flood, or moving due to a high rent situation. But this was a disabled person who was moving into a medically equipped unit. If that doesn't become a fundamental reason to establish eligibility for the Housing Stabilisation Fund, then something very glaring and obvious is missing. I'm going to turn this over to Ms. Lefebvre, but before I do, let me just say that I think the situation that I've just briefly outlined really drives home the need for policies, and not just policies, but practices that are based on fairness, on transparency, a recognition of the right to administrative fairness and natural justice, and that particularly and glaringly, because this has been a massive omission, actually respects the human rights of disabled people in this city. So I'm going to ask Ms. Lefebvre just to say a few words.
Yes, hi. My name is Gina Lefebvre. I used to be a nurse before, PSW nurse. I ended up having osteoarthritis, had knee surgery, and ended up disabled in a wheelchair for about 8 years. I'm a single mom raising 2 children, 28 and 18, still raising an 18-year-old, and that is why I am now moving from a Toronto Community Housing to accessible unit. I've been waiting 6 years in Toronto Community Housing for a move, 2 years with RPATH, the disabled program, who moved me to this location, and that's why I applied to my ODSP worker for funding for my move, and she only gave me $700 for a moving truck, and that's it. I got denied on a medical bed, denied on furniture, and any other things I may need, like essentials like, bedding and so forth, and kitchenwares and so forth. When you need to move, I got denied any amount of money, and I'm raising a daughter, 18, on ODSP. She is on my ODSP, so I really need the resource. I do not get childcare. She is 18. She is also sick right now, going through a lot of medical issues, so am I. I go to, rehab. I had a knee replacement that is defective. The doctors damaged it due to nerves. They damaged nerves during the knee replacement, so I'm still challenged. I'm trying to go to rehab and I may have to do surgery again. So I really am going through a lot, and to be denied my basic needs, which is I need help. And, I worked as a productive citizen. I'm a Canadian citizen, born and raised here in Toronto, and to be denied my rights, I don't think it's fair, and they need to change these policies with the HSD fund and not just have those criteria he mentioned. They should look into this and help people that are also disabled or need it for other reasons. Thank you.
The matter's under
Thank you.
appeal, and
Oh.
we hope for a just result. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mahavik?
Excuse me, thank you. Gina, just a question. Where were you housed before? It was in TCHC?
Toronto Community Housing at 15 Scatting, yes, and it wasn't an accessible apartment, and I damaged the walls every time coming in with my scooter, my electric chair, and they had to repair the walls. Took 5 years to get it repaired, and then I finally got an accessible unit at 50 Matilda, and that's where I'm living now.
Within TCHC as
Yes.
well? So was it moved from TCHC to TCHC?
Yes, but it was through RPATH, a different organization for disabled people.
Okay,
Through
thank you.
TCHCs, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mahavik. Any other questions for the deputants?
Yes, I do.
Yeah,
Just,
Councillor Fletcher?
When you moved to 50 Matilda, can I just ask a little bit about that unit as to how was it made
It's totally
accessible?
accessible. Everything's accessible, the kitchen, the bathroom, the bedrooms, everything's accessible. That's why I moved there.
Is there a shower or a
Yes.
bathtub? There's a
Yes.
a wheel-in shower.
Yes,
Yes,
there
so
is.
welcome to Ward 30, to my accessible units in 50 Matilda. But I'm
Thank
just
you.
checking on them. Getting in and out of the building is no problem for you?
Yes, no problem.
Okay, good, thank you.
Any other questions for the deputant? No?
No, I
Thank you very
actually
much.
have- I have one question, because you're moving from one TCHC to another TCHC, so, which is clear, some scatting to Matilda. So when you obviously needed waiting to go into that unit, did TCHC advocate for your moving expenses? Did you get any help there?
No, I tried to. I tried many times to apply, and they just gave me a moving company, which was like $1,800. I could not afford that. So I had to look for my own moving company that was a little bit cheaper. And I used that money that the ODSP gave me, which was $700 for moving expense on October 5th, and that's.
I'm
that
sorry, I
covered that.
couldn't hear what you said.
October 5th, ODSP, the HSD fund, gave me $700 just for a moving truck, and that covered that expense totally.
And what were your total expenses for moving?
700.
Oh, 700. So you did get that.
Yes, I did get that.
Eventually you got in,
Just for the moving truck, and that covered that whole expense.
okay. Did you have other expenses for moving?
Yeah, obviously, like, I had to also get people to assist me to help, other than the moving truck, because
Right.
there was also construction going on in my unit, the old place, and all this construction work, so they were tying up the elevators, so I had to get more people to help me move, so I can get it done in a timely fashion, because it took almost 5 to 6 hours at that rate, with one elevator working.
That was at Scatting.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Laura Bardot? I didn't see her. Unama Asliho? Unama Asliho. I hope I'm saying that right. No? Diego Vilches? Diego Vilches? Yogi Acharya. Great, thank you very much for coming. You have 5 minutes.
Thanks. Hi, so my name is Yogi Acharya, organizer with the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty. On June 29th, about 2 weeks since we had brought the first mass delegation to City Hall to demand justice for Laura Bardot, who couldn't be here today, we filed a Freedom of Information request asking the city to release HSF utilization and expenditure data for the year 2015. About 3 months later, and only after we had filed an appeal with the Information and Privacy Commissioner, the city responded. It denied our request by claiming that the data for 2015 was available in the reports that TESS had released for the years 2013 and 2014. Of course, it's a laughable claim. But we used the data that we had to write the Left in the Lurch report, which exposed how TESS was violating the Ontario Human Rights Code and abandoning any semblance of procedural fairness for HSF applicants. We documented how disabled HSF applicants who were on ODSP faced rejection rates of 24% in 2013, which rose to 32% in 2014. In its latest report, TESS finally released data for 2015, and yet again, we see what it was trying to conceal. The rejection rate for ODSP applicants had ballooned to 47% last year. That's nearly 1 in 2 applicants being refused access to this critical fund that enables people to have roofs over their heads and some basic furniture in their homes. Another statistic that's documented by TESS in their own reports is that in the year 2012, the final year that CSUMB operated in Toronto, 49,000 people on social assistance were able to access that fund. In last year, that number has now decreased to 24,500 people who are eligible to access critical housing needed supports. That's half the figure from 2012. Housing-related needs for people have only grown in that time. Our report documents increases in consumer price index in that time, massive inflation in food, all of which is undercut money people have left to deal with housing emergencies. Assuming some of the proposed changes that TESS is now proposing are approved, as of December 15th, HSF applicants will no longer have their disability benefits and Canada Child benefits counted against them while calculating HSF entitlements. We recognize that TESS has made a move in the right direction by making this change, but we also remember what it took to compel them and the city to act. 2 mass delegations, a mass call and write campaign, a report, a damning coverage in a major newspaper, multiple deputations here and elsewhere, and 7 months of focused organizing, all to get you to stop violating the Ontario human rights law. As our Left in the Lurch report documented in detail, people before me have referenced, problems with the HSF administration go beyond merely the question of eligibility, although that's a big one. There are recurrent issues with procedural fairness and people getting much less money than they are entitled to. Average issuance per application in the year 2013 was $728, and in 2014 was $907. People are supposed to be able to access funds ranging from $1,600 to $3,000. There are, of course, changes on those fronts that are being signaled to by TESS, but no details about them are currently available. The change we and most others in this room are most cautious of, as people before me have talked about, is the new flat rate benefit structure. Any flat rate benefit structure, by definition, is going to be restrictive, and the current flat rates that TESS has resulted in people not being able to have enough money to buy the furniture that they need. But there are also some other changes which have been referenced, but no details are available, particularly as they relate to documentation that people are asked to provide. But there are also concerns around how the review process works. Currently, when people appeal denials to either the internal review or the decisions review committee, current statistic that TESS has released tell us that 80% of these appeals are upheld. But the other disturbing trend that we and others have noticed is that when people appeal, appeals are sometimes upheld not on the original reason for denial, but on a completely different grounds. This is not something appeals are supposed to do. It's beyond the realm of what's actually allowed for an appeal to process. So lastly, I'll conclude by saying that we certainly hope that the changes that TESS has signaled to are implemented with the urgency that HSF applicants deserve. And they're implemented in good faith and in the best interests of HSF applicants. But if not, and you know this, we're prepared to fight to make sure that happens. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any questions for the deputant? No? All right. Thank you very much. That's it for deputants. I would now take questions for staff. Councillor Mahavik?
Thank you. Just on the fund itself, this is all provincial. Who am I speaking with? Great, thank you. Is this purely, it's is it federal money or provincial money?
This is CHIPI money.
So that's federal, right?
It's provincial money. It's coming from the provincial CHIPI fund.
Provincial CHIPI fund, okay. And basically, you have $27 million kind of in that,
That's
$27
right.
million.
Portion of the CHIPI
We don't put
money.
any of our own money in, do we, as a city?
I'm sorry, I wear a hearing aid and I've got speaking all around me, so I'm picking up a lot of sound. I'm so sorry. Can you repeat your question?
Do we put any money in as a city in this fund?
We,
Trying to
in
get a sense of this.
2016, we budgeted 1.5 million over the amount, but we didn't have to access it. So other than that, it's just straight CHIPI money. In 2016, just straight CHIPI.
Okay. My sense, can you respond to some of the issues that have been raised by the deputants? There's a variety of
Some
them.
of the issues that have been raised today,
Yes,
in general?
yes, in general.
Okay. Well, I think I'm very, very appreciative of the comments that have been made by the deputants, and we heard similar things in our consultation. There were issues around greater consistency needed, more transparency, the point around fairness and speed in particular, because people are in a high-risk situation. At the same time, they want a balance with flexibilities. So it's very difficult sometimes to set out hard criteria, exact amounts, and also have flexibilities. So we're attempting very much to get that balance. One of the things that came to my attention as part of my role as a chairperson on the Decision Review Committee is the burden that we place on clients for documentation. So that is one of the things that we are attempting to address going forward. We're attempting to address the issue around evenness and consistency by applying some sort of flat rates. Now, I know that we haven't indicated what those flat rates would be. I can assure you that there will be a lot of study and consultation around the rates. The idea would be to look at the market, the business environment, what the averages are, and what we've paid in the past to establish some sort of a flat rate process that is fair, that doesn't disadvantage people, but also decreases the needs to provide documentation around the receipts, et cetera, and provides more consistency.
My sense is that a lot of this is, well, would you perhaps want to comment on, is this fund adequate? It just seems like there's a mountain of need, and even at $28 million that you're not.
With the criteria set out, we believe that the fund is adequate.
It's adequate.
In fact, the OW rates, a caseload has been dropping. So, of course, there is some slippage in the fund because our overall caseload has been dropping. That is why the report also recommends that there be a flow from this amount of this CHIPI amount into shelter support and housing to be able to provide housing allowances.
I see. Just last question on that piece. If the funds were given for a specific purpose, and that is to help people transition from homelessness into housing or from higher rent housing to lower rate housing, I find it hard to understand the wisdom. Well, as much as we know that the housing, the housing allowances are grossly underfunded, wouldn't it be wiser for us to put that money, keep it in this account, in order to serve the purpose for which it was intended. Could you address that piece?
Well, I think what we're trying to do in this recommendation is to address the slippage that we're projecting for 2016. We can look in 2017 at the overall role of the various programs that promote housing stability and try to get a balance between what TESS is delivering and shelter support and housing as part of the housing stabilization plan.
With a view to, at the end of the year, not having a surplus. If this was the designated purpose of the account,
absolutely
use it for that purpose and use all the money for that purpose rather than.
Yes, I've spoken to the deputy city manager about that point around having it included in our process that we could have a proper flow and not a hard division between the different funds.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bailão.
Just a very quick question. The reason why you're asking us actually to put in the reserve for housing allowances, because by the program, the province requires you to spend the money until the end of the year, right?
Yes,
And so
that's
you're
correct.
changing the program so the next year we're not in this problem and it's spent on what it's meant.
You are correct technically. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bailão. Councillor Davis.
So when would these changes in eligibility go into effect?
The changes in eligibility in relation to the financial tests would take place on December 15th, once we have approval at City Council. We also reference a date of December 1st, and that is around making sure that we make clear the current criteria on our websites and the information flow. And then, of course, when we have the changes on December 15th, we would be updating that. In addition, we want to make other changes around the funding for soft furniture for bed bugs, the documentation requirements, et cetera. And we expect to have those in place once council approves on February the 1st.
The flat rate for moving costs, you're going to develop that using what kind of methodology? Are you simply going to look at a range and pick an average, or?
We're going to use an average. So for currently, we require the client to provide actual receipts and estimates. So there's a lot of documentation required with that. It creates an administrative burden for us as well as a major burden for the clients. So what we would like to do is survey the market. What would be the average cost of moving?
A one-bedroom?
The average cost of a
two-bedroom
bed.
house.
And I acknowledge that we need to update the amounts and then set new amounts and criteria that we would make visible on our websites and in our procedures.
I guess I'm trying to understand how you would do it, but you've obviously got some modeling in mind based on the size of the household or the size of...
Oh, yes, absolutely. We'd have to look at the size of the household. We have to look at what is deemed as essential furniture, et cetera. So we have work to do in the next couple of months.
And on the bed bugs issue, I'm glad to see that you're going to be more generous in terms of furniture replacement. Have you considered, and I know I've spoken with Councillor Fletcher about this briefly, but looking at other contributions to the bed bug strategy at the City of Toronto, whether or not this funding could be used for that purpose? There was a period at which we had $250,000 a year to put towards a variety of interventions, bug and scrub, and services that actually assisted residents who were struggling to prepare their units. And I don't see that we've got that continued commitment.
We have made a commitment to work with public health on the bed bug strategy overall, to look at what we might do. In the interim, we made a decision to recommend that we would replace soft furniture as well as beds. But we will be working with public health around preparation, around mattress covers, and other mechanisms that can help to
What
control
are we
this
currently
problem.
spending? Maybe the deputy city manager or someone else knows. What I wanted to know was whether this fund, it's possible that this fund could be used for those services.
Currently, it is not part of the criterion. We have not recommended that, but we will study with public health what makes sense in terms of cost effectiveness.
You know, what I'm asking is there any provincial restriction of using this funding for that purpose? No.
There's no provincial, it is a city program.
City.
There is no provincial restriction.
Okay. Not that I want to take away from what used to be the CSUM program, because that's, there is a need, obviously.
Yes. The city manager is just pointing out to me that, of course, the program is restricted to OW.
Through the chair, I just wanted to clarify that the fund is for OW and ODSP clients. You're saying as long as we can work with public health on expanding the strategies to address bed bugs.
I'm just trying to think about the possibility of how we expand the bedbug program, because I do not see that we are addressing it sufficiently, especially in apartment buildings in Toronto.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify, you had asked about restrictions, and that is the one restriction we have with the fund.
If
Thank you, Councillor
preparation
Davis.
of the unit for an OW client might be better served by prepping the unit for spraying
Yes.
so that it lasts,
Yes.
I think that's something that we could consider. So we will study that going forward with help from public health.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. I'm just going to deviate slightly from procedure. Emily Daigle was delayed in getting down here because she was on Wheel-Trans, I guess. You can speak to Councillor Cole afterwards. It would be honored to hear your comments. If you're ready to go, you have 5 minutes.
Thanks, guys.
Oh, are you okay? Oh,
As long as you're not hurt, that's all that matters. Don't you worry about it. Yes, the program.
I hate this desk because those are not long enough.
You pointed out, this is not accessible.
Yeah, that's right.
Sorry, guys.
Okay.
Now, does the mic still work? Thanks, Joe.
Now you got everybody's attention.
We're going to listen to your disputation.
Oh my God. Sorry, everyone, for being late, and I'm sorry for knocking over the desk.
Okay, this is the best excitement we've had. Completely unprecedented.
Oh my God. Chair, may I restart my 5 minutes?
That's part of your 5 minutes.
Hi, everyone. My name's Emily Daigle. Most of you know me from TTC Commission meetings and from being a transit advocate. I come here today as not only someone with multiple disabilities, but as somebody who's actually been a victim of the HSF fund, a stabilization fund, basic discrimination. And I call it that because I've had to apply for it 3 times in 5 years. I've been homeless. I was discriminated against horribly by the Family Red Shelter in Scarborough. That's a whole different story. I had to go to the ombudsman about that. Thank you, Fiona and Jackie. I I couldn't get help getting a place to live because the housing workers didn't know how to look for accessible housing that was within my ODSP. Thank you very much. The first time I applied, I only got $500 from ODSP. I couldn't afford first and last, couldn't afford a mover. So 71 trips on TTC and Wheel-Trans with things loaded on my wheelchair, and my poor husband, who's legally blind and physically disabled, we lost all our furniture, everything. We moved from one place that was extremely inaccessible, was making me more ill, and I was having major issues, to a place where I lived over garbage cans in a unit that claimed to be accessible and truly wasn't. There was mold, there was very little accessibility. I got the chance a year ago, basically a year ago, to get into the legacy of the Pan Am Games, which is one of the 100 affordable units. I got into a unit where there would be March of Dimes assistance, assistive living for my husband and I, who are both legally blind, and I'm in the chair, and I'm slightly hearing impaired, so I wear this to use the FM units here in the council chambers and in the meeting rooms. The HSF fund has been downloaded, and the authorization is no longer ODSP. It's OW. It's workers who are not trained to deal with people with severe disabilities or multiple disabilities, nor is it accessible for those with visual impairments because CNIB does nothing. They don't help you. I fought it. 3 workers in ODSP, as well as their managers, helped me fight it. I tried my counselor, my new counselor. Her staff applied. They were denied. I, as someone with multiple disabilities who's been an advocate for 27 years for people with disabilities, was appalled of the attitude of the worker that denied me, sent me a form letter, not large print, not even a phone call, just a letter. I couldn't even read it. I called the worker because I got someone to read the letter to me. He was extremely belligerent, extremely rude, had no concept of how much the new housing would help us and change our lives. We were in Scarborough. There were no accessible soup kitchens that I could get into easily. It was a 2-hour trek from there to here. I fought it on my own with those 3 ODSP workers who couldn't help me very much. I had to get one of them to help me dictate a letter because I wasn't able to write in the little tiny space on the forms. I won. Now, the only reason why I was actually able to move, because the one came after I moved, technically, after I got authorization to move in, was many trips up to Richmond Hill, the far north, almost Newmarket, to March of Dimes with a wonderful woman by the name of Joanne Dick, wonderful worker. But I got a personal loan, and you know who from? A very unliked person, a very close friend of mine who's a TTC bus driver. Yeah, a TTC bus driver who's going through hell himself with injuries. He was the one who helped me, couldn't afford movers, so we got him to drive a U-Haul truck. I think it was a U-Haul or discount or whatever it was. 3 blind people, 2 elderly women, and myself moving our stuff. We have barely any furniture. We only got a bed through the fund. But I'm going to tell you something. Until the workers are trained to deal with people with disabilities, be accommodating and be sensitive to our needs and to the changes that Pan Am Housing has given people like me, and to the fact that people with disabilities, if we try to rent an apartment, it's between 2 and 4 times the cost of a normal, quote-unquote, walk-up apartment. I just want to thank the councillors. Some of them are here, some of them are not here, that encourage me every day. One of them being my mensch, and he knows who he is. He encourages me, and the HSF needs to be looked at. Staff need to look at it with the eye of people, from not only the lens of people with disabilities that have been denied, that have lost everything, but from the lens of people who don't meet their tiny little criterias. People with disabilities who are living in completely inaccessible places that are making them more and more sick. I was living over garbage cans in the middle of the summer with no AC. with severe asthma and COPD and living on a CPAP at night. I was literally living on my CPAP all day, not even being able to get the energy to come down here. So the HSF needs to be completely rethought.
Emily, if you could
Yes, sir.
wrap up. Thank you.
I'll end with this. I know of 7 people with disabilities that were forced into homelessness. That is into a shelter system that is completely inaccessible for those that are legally blind or in large wheelchairs. Let's not create more homelessness with discrimination of a thing that needs to be completely rethought. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the deputant? No? Thank you very much.
Sorry for my crazy entrance.
It was dramatic.
Well, it is inaccessible, so hey.
Speakers. Councillor Mahavik?
Yes, thank you. I have 2 motions. I'm saying this is going to council. And it's basically what I hear from the deputants and what I heard from staff too, that this is work that is kind of ongoing. And sorry, my voice, so I'll be very tight with my words. So what this seeks to do is to ask staff to clarify the current criteria and look to expanding eligibility criteria for clients accessing the Housing Stabilization Fund. That's number 1. Number 2 is to add the words "one time." And the reason why I thought we should add those words is because the fund, the HSF, was created for a purpose, and that is to help folks who are moving into housing with transition costs. And we should be using the fund in its entirety. And when you hear some stories that people are not able to get the required money to do a move successfully, and then when you see the $3.8 million is not being used, then there's a bit of a mismatch there. So that needs to be fixed up for 2017. Understanding that for this year, we really need to take that money before the province claws it back. But that for 2017, that we would ask staff to really make sure that the fund is used in its entirety, and that the criteria for accessing the fund be clarified and expanded.
Thank you, Councillor Mahavik. Any other speakers on this item? Well, then we have the 2 motions from Councillor Mahavik. We'll put them on the screen. Motion number 1, all those in favor? Carried. And motion number 2, all those in favor? It's carried. The item is amended. All those in favor? It's carried. And now we bump up, we're sort of going backwards to 16.2, full-day kindergarten and school-age program updates. Questions for staff? Daycare. Sure. Victoria Bell? Victoria Bell? Jane Mercer? Jane Mercer? June Hall. Oh, Ms. Mercer, thank you. Thank you for coming. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. We're pleased to see this report come before you and to make the recommendations that the staff have made. We, as you know, have expanded the full-day kindergarten system in Toronto, and we have been told by the province through the school board that the 6 to 12 years is expected to expand as well. But as you would know from the last CDRC meeting in October, we have a real crisis in childcare. I know everybody's been hearing that for so long. It's really hard for you to see the cracks as they're occurring. But the pressure on our childcare system that has come from this expansion is so extraordinary, and the vacancies that we now sit with are causing such a collapse inside those programs that what I'm afraid it's impossible for council to see, but you are going to suddenly see it next year, is that programs close. They just shut their doors. There will not be any expansion of 100,000 spaces, certainly not the 30,000 we hoped for in the city. There will not be the expansion of after-school care. Programs simply can't do it. I'm going to ask to have two items passed to the committee members. One is the children waiting for subsidy and the vacancies. It's listed by ward. I think you would be shocked. Well, some of you won't be shocked. Councillor Mihevc won't be shocked to find that there are 0 vacancies for infants in his ward. Councillor Burnside might be surprised to hear that there are 30 vacancies for infants and, 10 vacancies for infants and 30 vacancies for toddlers in your ward, in spite of the fact that you're a very high needs area and you've got lots of parents waiting. So I'm going to pass around the latest statistics that I have, which were kindly provided by your staff. Shanley McNamee has provided those for me when I've asked. And the other thing is I'm going to get straight to the recommendations. There are things that you can do. These are the things that you know, that parents can't afford to pay more, that the childcare community cannot deliver it. Our supervisors and our volunteer boards are burnt out. They have paid for the expansion to date by the raising of their own childcare fees. They've been putting more and more stress on staff, and they are simply not going to be able to operationalize it any further. And sadly, we can't get RECEs to work in this system any longer. They don't want the jobs. They have been put under such extraordinary pressure with regulations and checklists from the city, the province, the school board. They are already overworked and they are just saying no. There are several things that you can do immediately. Number one, urge council to draw from the childcare reserves in 2016. Those are provincial childcare dollars. They have been sitting in a reserve account. They are intended for childcare. They will have no impact on snow clearing or gardener or anything else. They will keep open vital centres in many high needs communities. 2, urge the province to fast-track their funding, the funding they have already committed to. Explain to them that if you do not flow it to us now, childcare programs will shut their doors and will not be there for you next year. Number 3, direct your children's services staff to fill every infant toddler vacancy they can in every ward, in every centre. It's unbelievable, but even in an emergency like this, we have caps on centres of how many subsidised children they can or cannot have, while eligible parents wait. So whilst we're told we have a system where the subsidy follows the child, in fact, the subsidy will only follow the child as long as you still go into a childcare programme that Children's Services wants you to go into. That has to stop. Take childcare on in this city budget. For over a decade, Council has used the annual increases we've been getting in provincial funding to quietly flatline city dollars. And that has to stop.
It's past 5 minutes. If you could wrap up, that'd be appreciated.
Okay, I would like you to count up the dollars that we would have got if we'd had 2% every year for our 10 years, and we would have had enough to fill every one of those infant toddler vacancies. So I do have another couple of recommendations I would urge you to take a look at. Councillor Davis, it looks like you haven't got one. Here you go.
We'll have the clerk distribute them. Great, thank you very much.
Thank you
Questions for the
very much.
deputants? Councillor Davis?
So, I mean, so what's happened is there's been an expansion.
Yes.
Of kindergarten, and that's outlined in here. In
Yes.
particular, that I think we've got an additional 8,000 licensed spaces.
Yes.
But the subsidies have not increased.
Correct.
So the pot of subsidies are being spread wider and thinner.
Thinner, yes.
So the childcare centers have lots of vacancies because they can't afford the fees.
That's correct. So especially in our high needs areas, there are no full fee paying parents to come marching through the door to fill those other spots. And we've really tapped out our full fee paying parents. I mean, there's just a limit to how many parents can afford these kinds of fees.
So how many infant toddler vacancies?
At the bottom of that list, we have a total, we sit with 260 vacancies. You know, it's disappointing. I asked for these stats, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong one now. I asked for these stats on November 18th. That was exactly a sort of month after the ones I'd asked for in October 18th. The vacancies have actually still been growing. You know, there was a freeze on subsidies in September. We've been told now it wasn't a freeze, it was a freeze. We didn't get any children in. And when we don't get any children in and you stop the whole ship, you know, parents at the top of the wait list have had to make other decisions. So then when you try to get the train going again and start getting families in, it's not moving as fast as we want to get families in. I do understand from Ms. McNamee that there are some 600 children in the process of getting their subsidy okayed. But, you know, these are critical months, September, October, November. And the same, you know, reputable centres are sitting with $60,000 losses, $90,000 losses. And that's scary. Those are volunteer boards of directors. They carry all the liability. They will lay off staff. And then they can't get staff again.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Any other questions for the deputants? Yeah, Councillor Mahevik.
Sorry, I'm sure there's a simple answer, but I just want to make sure. This is a chart that has been handed.
Yes.
So, and just, I don't know, just for fun, going to any ward, my ward, Ward 21, it says waiting. That means 60 parents are waiting for, 60 sets of parents are waiting for infant, 37 for toddler, 30 for preschool. The next column is vacant. That means how many spaces are vacant.
Yes.
Not how many subsidized spaces are vacant.
That is correct. That is, I think that is correct. Is that correct? I look towards the manager. That's actually telling you physical spaces.
Physical spaces, but to get that vacancy down to zero, it would require full fee paying parents for each of those categories.
Or we would prefer fast track your subsidies because.
Yeah, right, I get it.
Yes.
Okay. I just need to understand how this.
Yeah,
is,
obviously if full fee paying parents did come along, as they might do in some of the wards, then those vacancies do get filled.
And so the overall number Right now in Toronto, we have 4,325 spaces that could accommodate families, but basically families can't afford to access them.
That's
Because we're at
correct.
18,900 waiting, on the waiting list for subsidies.
Correct.
Okay, great. I'm reading this. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mihevc, and thank you for the deputation.
And I would draw you to two other recommendations on my list that I didn't get to that I think will be of great interest to you.
They've been
Thank you.
circulated? June Hall? Thank you for coming. You have 5 minutes.
Okay, is this speaker on? Do I have to hit the button?
Push the button.
All right. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is June Hall. I'm a director of Main Square Daycare, and I have been the manager there for 28 years. I'm 34 years in the field of early childhood. Childcare to me and to a lot of my families is necessary to grow the economy, reduce child poverty, and educating our youngest citizens. I am supportive of City Council pursuing further funding for childcare. But however, we must not take money from other age groups to fund an extended program. I came before this committee in October to bring your attention to the freeze that had been placed on childcare spaces for infants, toddlers, and preschoolers since the beginning of September. I'm still sitting with 8 preschool vacancies and 7 toddler vacancies. I bring to you today a petition that has been signed by a number of concerned parents and childcare staff in the City of Toronto. They have seen their programs floundering, and they're alarmed, and they're struggling since September with empty spaces. I have more petitions coming, but unfortunately I didn't have enough time to print them all, but I can continue to receive them and pass them forward. Many of these programs and many of these neighborhoods provide services for the most vulnerable children. Time is of the essence for these vacancies to be filled. The situation is unlike anything that I have seen in my career. Thank you for your time and attention. Janet is my counselor, so Janet, do you mind if I pass these along to you? And
Do you want to save them for council?
absolutely.
Or submit them to council?
Yes, and I will pass along any further ones that come in here. Just to let you know as well, I do sit on the Minister's Early Years Advisory Committee, and I have expressed to them my concern and shared my situation with them and the childcare community. So, you know, they are aware that these vacancies are sitting empty and that there is a lack of funding for these spots.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any questions for the deputant? Councillor Davis.
So you began to have vacancies in the summertime, is that right?
Actually, September 2nd.
Okay.
And it was, as I deputed in October, it came suddenly, it was unannounced, and it came at a very vulnerable time for childcare programs. We have a tendency to have a turnover around that time with kids going back to school and moving from one room to another.
Right, so Ward 31 has 485, 6 kids on the waiting list and 77 vacancies. And that was November 18th. So what have you had to do to?
Since I presented last month, I have officially laid off a staff. I have also, I'm floating currently one of my staff who does all the breaks and does all the covering off of vacations, et cetera. So I'm doing my best to operate in a financially viable way. I mean, I've got 28 years of experience, so I am very familiar with what I need to do, and some of those decisions were very hard. And as I said, I did lay off one of my staff, and I'm not one of the only programs that has done that.
Yes, I noticed there is also a communication from Gledhill Child Care Centre, and I'm very familiar with what's going on there, but one of the problems is that the budget is based on a 98% enrollment to capacity. So if you have less than 98% to licensed capacity, then you're losing money on those spaces, every one of them. Is that right?
That's correct.
Right. Maybe it's time to look at that.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Any other questions for the deputants? No? Thank you very much. There's questions for staff. Councillor Davis?
Thank you for indulging me. I know I'm here every month, and it drives you crazy, but this situation, I want to just ask the staff. So your report shows, on page 5, there's a table, and it shows there's been 8,000 new licensed spaces for kindergarten kids in the before and after school program. Is that right?
That's correct, since 2012.
And there's been significant expansion as well in infants and toddlers as a result of many conversions over the last few months, and school age, I understand.
Yes, there has been, less so in school age, but more in infant and toddlers.
So how much has the license capacity grown across all age groups?
From 2010 to today, it's by about 12,000 spaces.
And those 12,000 spaces, licensed capacity, those don't mean they're financed?
No.
Or don't have subsidies?
Those are physical spaces. The number of subsidies has increased by about 2,000.
Those 2,000 were introduced in 2010, and then I think a couple of hundred. As I recall, the motions were 249.
Yes, there were a
couple of other
960 processes, and then we did get an increase in provincial funding, I think 3 years ago, which enabled us to further increase subsidies.
So the proportion of the system of spaces to license capacity, fee subsidies to license capacity is what now? And
Right
what?
now, it is about 39%, down from 40%.
So we're feeling the vacancies because of a proportional reduction in fee subsidies.
Yes, that would be part of it. We're also, as we reported last month, we're also seeing the impact of affordability. And also, the vacancies, I should point out, are reported by the operators. We're currently investigating a centralized wait list as per your directive. So we're always a little bit dubious about that information. But the issues are affordability, lack of subsidies, and individual centres don't always have maintained wait lists. And also the reality is we're not dealing with a universal system. It's a market-based system, and centres are not marketing the way they used to ensure they're attracting that full fee clientele when we're not able to pay to place fee subsidies.
That evidence is based, or that comment
It's
is
based on what our consultants observe when they're out in the community. And as we're launching the new funding model in January of this coming year, the consultants have been meeting with every childcare operator in the system.
Hasn't the city's directly operated centres also seen a reduction?
Absolutely, and that ties right back to lack of subsidies and affordability.
And marketing?
We don't market either, I agree.
Exactly.
But it is a
Anyway.
market-based system, there's no getting around that.
Oh, affordability for sure. For the
Affordability
city's
is a large issue.
systems. Anyway, if we were to ask for you to report on if we restored the traditional or the previous proportion of fee subsidies to licensed capacity. In other words, to look at how many spaces are required to go to 40%. Could you provide a report through the budget process to do that?
Yes, we could.
Okay. And I think you've seen the other small motion to amend recommendation 1 to ask the province. I mean, we're asking the province for more spaces, but we're not specific about how many. And I'm wondering if you could just comment on what is it we're going to be asking the province for as part of our new negotiations around the federal-provincial agreements that we're expecting to come.
So first of all, the 100,000 spaces was a provincial announcement. Our request back is always that we cannot continue to add spaces to the system without adding subsidies. We're currently doing modeling based on our demand formula that was presented at the last committee that will look at a combination of what we need in terms of fee subsidies for those families that will always require assistance with fees and base funding to address affordability for all families. So it will be a combination of the two, and really it's based on a variety of assumptions, including what percentage of the population we expect to enter childcare. Right now it's about 20%. We'd be looking at modeling for something in the area of 40%.
Okay, so if we were to look at
Councillor
amending
Davis, your
this
last
to
question.
include operating and subsidies, you'd be fine with that?
That would be great.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Any other questions for staff? I have a couple. Regarding, on page 7, there's a reference to programming sometimes takes place in unsuitable space within a school. Could you just describe for a minute what is unsuitable space?
With the introduction of full-day kindergarten and also the pending expansion of school age, the idea is that children would continue with their before and after school programs in classrooms that are outfitted in accordance with the Early Years Act. That is not always the case. Across the board, it is quite inconsistent. It varies often by principal, but children are often moved from one room to another. If there's a resistance to share space, we are working closely with the boards of ed to address that issue, and we are making some good progress. But not all of the spaces meet the quality and regulatory requirements to the best that they can.
Now, I would think that a teacher coming in early in the morning to prep their class to get organized for the day, the last thing she would want, or he would want, is their classroom full of kids and daycare workers.
So that is exactly true, but it's the same children, whether they're there at 7 o'clock or 9 o'clock, and it is not the teacher's classroom. It's a space for the early learning and childcare, and it needs to be seamless throughout the day to maximize quality for the children. So there has to be a different way at looking at how teachers and ECEs work together and how they prepare for the day.
And when it comes to capacity building, is there a risk that our capital program is running way ahead of our ability to subsidize? In other words, is there a risk that we're building daycare spaces, and I'm looking at page 6 of your report, that will be a white elephant daycare centers, unfilled is the term you use?
Well, as we reported last month, the growth strategy that we did report on included all capital that's currently in the pipe. So once all of that is delivered, we figured the maximum that we could add to the system was 7,000 spaces, and beyond that, they would be vacant. So these were accommodated in that, and so I do not think that they will be white elephants, but we do need to continue to advocate to the province because they do drive the subsidy system for fee subsidies and affordability measures. I mean, the city's average contribution to childcare is 20 cents on the dollar, so it really is important to recognize the order of government that can really manage material change.
All right, last question. I just happen to notice on page 3 that there's capital funds available for home daycare. Is that a common
It was a one-time investment by the province for ties and equipment. It's not common.
Because the capital going into private homes would be a rarity, is what you're saying.
It would be very rare, and I think that was part of the transition. It was part of the province's transitional funding, and it was to ensure that those homes were properly equipped. It wasn't a renovation, it was ties and equipment for children.
Okay, thank you very much. Speakers? No speakers? Oh, Councillor Davis. Surprise, surprise. You have 5 minutes.
I never take you by surprise. You always know I'll be here. So Councillor Fletcher has agreed to move these two motions. One of them amends Recommendation 1, which, if you could put it on the screen. Recommendation 1 asks the province to provide subsidies for the kindergarten and school-age programs, and that's good. But I think we also need to talk about operating funding as well as part of the request of the provincial government. The other motion asks that we look at the potential to restore some additional fee subsidies for 2017, or we potentially add some fee subsidies for 2017 that would restore the ratio of subsidies to licensed spaces. Because what's happened is there's been this massive growth in licensed spaces as a result of the full-day kindergarten program, and we've really had no expansion of subsidies. So it says, you know, let's look at those costs. What the general manager said is that it's about a 1% slippage, and that I don't know what that represents in spaces, but I think it would be very useful to look at that through the budget process. So this motion will be considered by a report will go to both committees. There may be some questions about the process, but this is exactly the motion that the Chair of Planning and Growth used the other day. So I think it's properly before you. And I just want to thank the staff again for a thorough report. We do have now access to these new programs. The provincial government is about to do the same thing with school age. So all the school boards have been asked, in fact mandated the school boards. I don't think everyone knows this, to deliver programs starting this year, 2017, the same as the kindergarten programs. And the experience we've had with kindergarten, I think, is a good learning experience before we enter into the new domain of expanded mandated school-age programs. And the school board is looking at this as well, and they have approved a report request, and we will be working with them to look at an evaluation of all-day kindergarten. And I'm sure we'll see the results of that report, hopefully prior to moving into another new program, which is the kindergarten, or the school age for grades 1 and up. So those are my motions, and I hope you'll support them.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Any other speakers?
I didn't use, I just want to give a nod to the deputants who are here. I didn't do that. I want to thank you.
Feel free to, you have some time.
And
Bank some time.
And I mean, this is a petition, I don't know how many are here now, but hundreds. And I can tell you that there are many, many childcare centers that are really struggling right now. There's a letter from one of them here today. Now, there are multiple reasons for the situation, but they are struggling to stay afloat. And they've had to downsize their programs, and they have no access to subsidies. If you look at this list, the thousands, we're back up to 18,700 kids waiting for a subsidy in the City of Toronto. And the province, thankfully, has committed, and they're having a consultation this week? On the 7th of December. to hear what parents think, and I trust that the parents will be there saying the same thing, is that childcare is too expensive, and we need more subsidies, not just capital money, and we need operating dollars to address affordability. We can build them, but they will not come if the childcare centers don't have access, families don't have access to some kind of financial support to access childcare in Toronto.
Oh, thank you for that addendum to thank the deputants. Certainly roundabout. Councillor Fletcher. We need you to move a couple of motions.
Yes, the two motions that Councillor Davis has put up on the screen, because I'm very happy to move those today. And as well, very glad that while we're moving into what appears to be a fairly significant transition in the requirement to offer school-age childcare, which has been a long-standing issue, that there hasn't been a requirement to offer school-age as far as full-day kindergarten is concerned, that may trigger other things taking place. So we want to keep a robust system, and both of these motions work towards that. So I move these this morning, ask for committee support.
Great, so there's two motions we're voting on. I understand that would conclude speakers. Recommendation 1, it's on the screen. All those in favor? Carried. Recommendation 2, B. All those in favor? Carried. The item is amended. It's carried. Thank you very much. Thanks to staff for a solid report. Item 3, Toronto Fire Services Inclusion Plan. We have a Deputy Frank Ramanago. One day I'll get it pronounced correctly. Thanks very much. You have 5 minutes.
Good morning. My name's Frank Ramignano. I'm the president of Toronto Firefighters. You might not recognize me. It is Movember, but today is also Giving Tuesday. So if you haven't given to anyone, you can look me up on the Movember website. And even from you, Councillor Burnside, I take donations from anyone. I'm pleased to be here to support the TFS inclusion plan. The TPFFA is committed to working with the Toronto Fire Service and the city to make Toronto Fire Service a diverse and inclusive workplace. We can and we will do more. As identified in the report, Chief Pegg and I have launched a TFS inclusion working group. They will be proactively identifying opportunities and suggestions that will help inform and enhance the development and implementation of the plan. I'm here to let you know that we are willing to work with the city and the Toronto Fire Service to advance this report. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Very concise. Any questions for the deputy? Councillor Mahavik.
Good morning. To be quite frank, I find the numbers kind of low. Like we have a diversity, we have a community that frankly is 50%, over 50% non-white in Toronto. And I don't see a breakdown of the numbers here, how many of these are even white women. Can you just speak to the issue? Are we, we're all on the same team, are we being aggressive enough? Are we being strong enough in this area?
Well, obviously, the numbers would reflect that there's a lot more room to grow, and I agree with you. We need to reflect our community. Some of the issues that we've had in the fire service are the actual resources that the Toronto Fire Service had to be able to go out and be aggressive. When we compare ourselves to other cities, other divisions within even our own city, with the amount of resources they have, compared to the Toronto Fire Service, makes it a lot more difficult. I think with that said, we can't keep using that as an excuse, and you see why the Toronto Fire Service now would like to start including the actual personnel that we do have employed to help with that. because obviously we can't get the resources. We've been trying for years to get the resources to grow the capacity of the Toronto Fire Service to reach out into the community. Resources aren't easy to come by, so we have to find alternative ways of doing it.
Councillor Burnside.
Thank you, through you. How many firefighters are hired annually?
It varies on.
Don't tell me not enough.
It varies on retirement. We are actually approaching, the Toronto Fire Service is unique in which historically we have a bubble of hiring that goes all the way back to when we were on 3 platoons and we moved to 4, when North York was volunteer and moved to full-time. So 25% of the Toronto Fire Service was hired between the years 1988 and 1992. So they're now starting to reach the retirement age in the next couple of years. So right now we're averaging about 100 retirements. We'll see a bubble to about 150, 170 for the next 5 or 6 years, and then it'll go back to the average.
So sorry to interject. So in the last 3 years, you've seen, for instance, you've seen 100 per year?
I believe so, roughly around there. I looked at it the other day. We had 1 year 75.
So that's, in 3 years, that's 300? Roughly?
Roughly.
Give or take, whatever. How many firefighters are there total?
3,000.
3,000. So 10% of the workforce is turned over in 3 years?
Correct.
Right. So would you say that given the slow turnover, that results are going to be slow, much like the slow turnover on city council, and maybe that's why we don't see any diversity on city council?
I believe it's going to be slow, but I think there's, as I illustrated, a great opportunity to really, when you have 25% of your workforce coming up for retirement, you want to fix the problem before that.
Oh, I get the opportunity. I'm just looking at where we are right now, going backwards.
There is no overnight fix. You're absolutely correct.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Burnside. Any other questions for the deputants? No? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Questions for staff? Councillor Mihevc?
So am I speaking now? Okay, thank you. I'm just asking the same question. The request in September 17, 2015 was to have data, benchmarks, I don't see any benchmarks, and strategies to improve equity goals. I'm just, and to be just a preface to the question, I'm just finding that we're not, frankly, maybe the word is aggressive enough in achieving targets given the changing demographics of Toronto's community. And it's going to bite us if we don't get this right. I'm wondering if you could respond. Well, first of all, where are the benchmarks? What are our benchmarks?
Through the chair, Councillor, I agree with you that the limitation we've had in the past, the diversity efforts and initiatives for Toronto Fire Services came out of the former, what was known as a Path to Diversity report. There were significant limitations in Path to Diversity that we've now discovered and have been embedded into the framework for the new plan. Principally, Path to Diversity only focused solely on our operations division, and then only focused solely on the recruitment process within the operations division. So what you have in front of you is the framework for what will become the new TFS inclusion plan. And embedded in that plan, contained in that plan, will be a number of cross-departmental initiatives. So we'll expand that outside of operations and take all of this work into all of the other entry-level and recruitment positions available within TFS. And to your point, Councillor, we'll also be working very diligently, not only to create the strategies, but to create targets and benchmarks and then the associated key performance indicators to track our progress along that path.
But those key performance indicators are to be presented now. In fact, I remember going eyeball to eyeball with the chief and him promising up and down, twice actually, in the previous term of council, that there'd be benchmarks and that I could hold them to account and he would lay his job on the line, that this was going to happen and it was going to be strong and aggressive, and I don't see the benchmarks. Like, so what is the benchmark? What is our benchmark? Is it 50% of number of recruits from underrepresented populations? Is it 33%? Is it 25%?
Through the chair, Councillor, you're correct. The benchmarks, there were no well-defined benchmarks within the Path to Diversity report. That is a key, as I said, key component of the inclusion plan strategy going forward. Page 3 of the report outlines what the achieved benchmark was, or what the achieved result, I should say, was. So over 2015 and 2016, there was an average of 26.6% diversity in all of the operations recruit classes, and obviously the details are there for you, but it candidly stopped short of targets. It stopped short of any type of KPI other than what the result out the recruitment end of the pipe, if you will, was.
So just on that issue, excuse me, of number of recruits. So just take one, January 5th, 2015, of the 13 representing underrepresented populations, how many of them were women?
I don't have that breakdown here, Councillor. We can certainly attempt to get that. The other, I should say, one of the limitations that we've had, and hence you'll note that it forms one of the key frameworks within the inclusion plan going forward. The methodologies and means that we've had, that we employed and had access to with respect to gathering this information were very limited. And again, to be very candid, one of the big challenges we faced is there is a generally low return on the self-reporting or self-declaration of diversity in both the applicant pool and the recruit class. In any pool or in any survey, the pool are given the opportunity for a prefer not to disclose, and that rate is very high. We're seeing that most notably on the applicant end of the pool. We know from candidate testing services, which manage all of the intake for us, that number sits right now at about 44%. So 44% of the applicants prefer not to disclose anything related to our efforts in diversity and equity. So it makes gathering that information very difficult, and it makes reporting it in an accurate and reliable means even more difficult.
So how did you get these numbers?
These numbers represent what was self-reported. So these are the numbers that were reported by those individual recruit classes on a self-reporting scale.
I see. Okay, I'll speak.
Thank you, Councillor Mihevc. Questions for staff? Councillor Davis?
There was an attempt some years ago to work with TESS, and I haven't seen in here any reference, and our TESS people are gone, but to work with TESS. Are you still doing that?
Yes, Councillor. Through the chair, we are absolutely still working with Employment and Social Services, and in fact, in the development of the framework for the inclusion plan, that relationship has been strengthened, as well as we now have formal partnerships in place with Equity, Diversity and Human Rights Division and the City's Human Resources Division. The principal partnership that we had in the past with TESS was a program known as FCAP, or the Fire Career Access Program. While that program produced some very tangible results early, it was somewhat ahead of its time. And when the candidate testing services system was implemented and introduced, it unfortunately duplicated a lot of the efforts that were in our former FCAP process. So the result was we ended up having people having to replicate or duplicate stages instead of making the process more streamlined. So in the past number of months, we've worked with TESS to revamp, and we are in the process of revamping FCAP. And like I said earlier, that's one of the examples. We will be expanding things like the FCAP concept, so making careers within other aspects of fire outside of the operations division, so things like fire prevention and public education and communications. Creating means to make those opportunities more accessible across our whole city structure, and TESS is a big part of that.
So that's a good question, follow-up question. You have hired 150 so far of education, prevention, and inspection staff, is that correct?
Yeah, I'm not, through the chair, I can't give you the exact number, Councillor, but that's pretty close, since 2012.
And how many of those hires are from underrepresented groups?
Through the chair, that's another area. We had an extraordinarily low response rate in the self-reporting. That's the principle of what prompted us. That was our first reach out to EDHR. So EDHR will now be working with us to help build tools, survey tools and methodologies, and hopefully leveraging things like the Count Yourself In survey strategy to be able to garner that information.
You have no how many women? You have no information of those new 150 inspectors? How many, for instance, are women or persons of color? There's no information?
Through the chair, I certainly don't have it here today, Councillor. We can endeavor to get that to you. This report responds to the former Path to Diversity. That's why you're not seeing prevention included. The framework for Path to Diversity was limited to operations.
Why would the pathway to diversity be limited to fire suppression? Why wouldn't you not? Why wouldn't you have it also open to the non-suppression position?
Through the chair, I can't personally speak. It predates me, the origin of Path to Diversity.
Are you going to change it then?
Absolutely, Councillor. The TFS inclusion plan will reach across the entire organization.
Okay, just finally, when we do appointments to our agencies, boards, and commissions, we have the percentages of each of the underrepresented groups or population groups by percentage of total population. So we can see women by age and different ethno-racial groups, ability, LGBTQ, et cetera. So are you following the same approach that we use, which is establishing targets by underrepresented group?
Through the chair, that is what will form what you're actually you're launching a precursor to what will be the inclusion plan. So this report today simply updates you on the Path to Diversity, is advising and explaining that we are, in essence, we're moving past the Path to Diversity. We will now move into the phase where we will create the TFS inclusion plan with the goal, and our plan now will be to be back in front of you with a presentation on the comprehensive inclusion plan by the end of Q2 2017. If I may, Councillor, you raised one other point that I think is important that committee understand. In looking at the data, what we have come to understand clearly is the root of our issue and the root of our limitations with respect to diversity and recruitment is at the application end. It's at the pool. The inlet end of the pipe, if you will, the pool.
Yes.
We know from CTS now, only recently have we been able to get this data, only 19% of the applicant pool, the total applicant pool, define themselves or state that they live in Toronto. We understand that the diversity rate when you move out into the rest of Ontario drops sharply. So we know that the path to success for us, we have to create strategies where we're attracting far more interested, qualified applicants that are Toronto residents into the pipe.
Do you have any information on second and third generations?
That's your last question.
I don't.
Thank you, Councillor David. Any other questions for staff? Councillor Cole?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I've always appreciated that at the times I've seen where there's outreach, and I know outreach is a small part of kind of getting to the point where people are applying and more diverse communities are applying, but where you've seen whether actually personnel or equipment out in a community, especially with kids, it's always a huge hit, and the police have always obviously borrowed from that too. But as I think about the 6 years I've been a councillor in the communities that I would cite, like Eglinton West, Lawrence Heights, Neptune, and even Oakwood Village, where there's an actual station, all areas where there's a higher proportion of kind of visible minorities and people we want to attract, I have never ever seen Toronto Fire Services have a presence in any of those communities outside of attending to a fire. And so I'm wondering about what's the strategy around targeted outreach into communities where the current visibility for, say, a young man or woman right now of that profession is maybe one traumatic experience in their neighborhood, and that's it.
Absolutely. Through the chair, couldn't agree more, Councillor. We are one of the pillars of the framework for what will be back to you with the inclusion plan will be a comprehensive strategy for community outreach. So right now we're limited. President Ramillano spoke about the fact we have one person, one FTE allocated to community outreach in Toronto Fire Services. So we're looking now at opportunities. We're about to launch some or reallocate some existing resources, at least in an interim capacity from our public education division. So somewhat enhance our public education message to include the community outreach and recruitment picture. But when we're back to you with the plan, Councillor, it will have a comprehensive community outreach component and plan to it about how we can leverage things like you referenced, the ambassador program in the Toronto Police we recognize as best practice, and we're working very diligently to be able to do our best to replicate something like that.
And thank you. Just one really short follow-up. So when I do see kind of a truck and at a street party or something, and they've got some water going, and kids, it's like flies on rice. That's obviously happening at the local level, and not because of a position or an outreach program. Why does that happen in some neighborhoods and not in others?
Through the chair, generally those types of engagements are on community request. So those represent requests that have come in for our engagement in certain events. They're reviewed, and if we have the resource capacity that day, we'll deal with that. Our proactive work, the proactive community outreach is often limited or almost always limited by the available resources. One of the key initiatives as I spoke about leveraging the ambassador program Toronto Police have used with success, it's about educating and arming all of our teams in the field with additional information and additional resources and the ability to not only educate on key safety messages, which is a key component of the truck engagement, but also on providing solid advice and perspective and next steps, if you will, on how people can get interested in and pursue these careers and where to go next.
And sorry, just finally, Mr. Chair, through you. So if in a community like the ones I've described, where probably traditionally there is no one who has been in your profession that people can look to who know that world, unless, that's absent, but unless there's someone else for some reason who's making a proactive request to Toronto Fire Services, there won't be a presence. Historically, I'm hoping that will change, but that presence then won't be there in any way, really.
Yes, historically, Councillor, that's the situation, and I'm alongside with you. That is absolutely our intention to change.
Okay,
our goal is to create literally a comprehensive community outreach program so that we're doing this proactively instead of reactively.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Question? Go ahead.
Councillor Burnside.
Thank you. Through you. You said one of the limiting factors in terms of outreach was available resources. That seems a bit nebulous. Could you expand on that?
Sure. Through the chair, we in the TFS staff complement, there is one full-time position allocated to community outreach. So we have one district chief that is responsible on a day-to-day basis to perform this function. So in the past number of months and the past year or so, we've been working very hard to integrate that work into our public education division. So in essence, to be able to leverage existing resources more. That work will now continue through the inclusion plan to not only leverage public education, but also leverage all of our operations division staff and all of our team members. So the plan will include, give full consideration to how we can deliver that service leveraging the resources that we have.
Wouldn't some of your best ambassadors be firefighters themselves?
Through the chair, absolutely, and are every day.
Well, maybe not so much in certain areas, from what I'm hearing.
Through the chair, it's not. I would suggest that it's not a. This is not a situation where the interactions are ineffective or mistargeted. The problem that we have is we haven't had in the past the ability to create a schedule, create a citywide strategy that leverages and identifies what are the best opportunities to reach the community. Is it in particular small events? Are they the large scale events? Some of as we're learning as we go with this, it seems intuitive that some of our largest scale events may be the best bang for our buck, so to speak. But sometimes as we review the data and as we review the interactions we're having with the people, large-scale events draw a very, very significant portion of the attendees from outside Toronto. So not always are we actually talking to Toronto residents and talking to the audience that we're looking for when we're at you know, mass events. So that's the level of work that needs to happen. EDHR has offered, they're certainly offering some expertise to us, and we're going to leverage that expertise on how to best reach into all of the equity-seeking groups that we aspire to reach and connect with.
Through the chair, I would say intuitively, the best bang for your buck would be through the local fire hall in terms of hitting 100% Toronto residents. Would you agree?
Through the chair, absolutely, I agree. And that's what, when we speak of the ambassador program that exists within Toronto Police, that's precisely where we envision this going. Equipping every firefighter in every fire station on every fire truck with the ability to be a recruitment community outreach ambassador for TFS.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Councillor Burnside. Councillor Fletcher.
Who is doing your outreach plan?
Who is creating it, Councillor?
Yes.
We are internally.
Internally?
Yes.
Do you have a consultant that you're working with?
Through the chair, at this point, there's no consultant funds identified, so as it goes forward, we will be as an internal staff resource. Tony and Mary are here with me today, so we'll be creating the framework for the plan. That will be back to you midway through 17. We anticipate that some of the rollout plan, some of the next steps, if you will, may well involve the retainment of expertise. One area of that would be, I don't want to presuppose, but I'm going to suggest that one of the action items will be a comprehensive, what's known as an employment systems review, whereby we would retain an external expert to come in and do, if you will, a forensic review of all of our recruitment practices for the purposes of systemic bias and all those types of things.
So currently, there seems to be an outreach plan in the 905, since everybody is applying from the 905. But there isn't, and so I guess I'm a little concerned that you're not. Are you working with anybody in the city on your outreach plan? Because this is the city, and there's outreach that's missing in so many places.
Yes, through the chair. Right now, our
Who is it?
three principal partners: Toronto Employment and Social Services, Equity, Diversity and Human Rights, and the city's Human Rights Office. Or sorry, Human Resources, rather.
So I guess if the DCM would also look perhaps and see if there's anybody missing from that, as far as partners that would understand where the outreach has been missing, since you've told us there hasn't been any, and to make sure that it's going fairly deep. Even with the current outreach, we'll call it, at fun fairs, there's no system in place where people are informed what it takes to be a firefighter or anything that's handed out in any way. There's stickers handed out, you get to sit in the car, so it's really just a nice afternoon. Would you agree with me?
I would agree, Councillor, that at this point we've not provided information on recruitment. All of those efforts to date are pretty much limited or driven towards public education and fire safety.
And is there a reason why we're not having, well, 416, what have you decided or determined why no one is applying from the 416 and why communities of color aren't accessing jobs in the fire department?
Right, so that, through the chair, that is information, that's part of the work that will go on between, now and the creation of the plan. We're working very diligently with the folks at Ontario Fire Administration Incorporated, who administer the candidate testing services. They manage and have access to the intake pool. I should clarify, Councillor, there is a fairly high applicant rate within the 416 from the GTA. 19% of that is what is coming, are declaring Toronto as their place of residence.
So, yeah, I'm talking about the 416, which is just Toronto.
Right,
so
understood.
19% of only 19% of applicants for Toronto Fire Service are from the city of Toronto proper. Is that what you're telling us this morning?
Yes, only 19%.
And why have you determined that it's only 19% and there's 81% in Durham and Peel and everywhere else who are applying?
Right. We don't know all of the answers to that question yet, Councillor, and that's part of That's part of the work that will go into the creation of the plan. We need to fully understand that and then create the strategies to
But what
reach.
is how are you going to figure that out? What's your plan to figure that out?
So one aspect or one thing that is in the process of being launched is the Fire Chiefs Council on Access, Equity, and Diversity. So we have a community-based advisory council, if you will, that we're just in the process of reviewing the attendance list or membership list on that. I suspect it's going to be expanded. So we'll be looking to our staff, the people that work in the organization, to help us understand that, the men and women that are in the stations every day, but also to community leaders and community groups to help inform and give us that information.
So I guess this is a pretty big deal, that it's not really about having a council or people that are going out already. There's something structurally wrong here, where there's only 19% of people who live in Toronto applying for really fantastic jobs within the borders of our city. There's something's wrong. So I think that somebody has to externally tell us what is wrong, what's been going on, why aren't people applying, where's that big hole, and what I gather the success rate would be then from applications. And as you say, there's not many less underrepresented communities in the 905 area. So our plan already has a big glitch because nobody's applying. And I guess I'm going to ask the Deputy City Manager, and I know it's not directly your file, but does that concern you that only 19% of Torontonians are applying, that it means that underrepresented communities really aren't thinking about applying or applying? And is there a structural reason? Is there a cultural reason? Is there any other reason? And how are we going to test and find out what those reasons are prior to putting forward an outreach plan? Because the first thing we have to do is figure out why they're not applying in the City of Toronto. I'd like an answer to that question.
So through you, Mr. Chair, the city is very committed, and so is the fire services, to doing better in terms of representation and having a more diverse workforce. And we've been working together to understand what the reasons are that are hindering us from achieving better representation out there. I think the review that's being planned in terms of the overall systems, because a lot of times it could be some systemic issues that are stopping or acting as barriers for people from applying. So we just have to understand that. It is going to take time, but I can tell you that the city is committed to understanding what the barriers are and knocking those down.
But I'm asking who is assisting, because we've been doing this over and over and over and over and over again in a certain way, and at times, if you've been doing it in a way that hasn't been effective, the same people doing it to try to be effective isn't always your best way. So I'm asking who externally is advising, how are we getting to the bottom of this, what's the plan to figure that out before we get to the an actual outreach plan. So do you want to bring a draft here of determining why there's only 19%?
My understanding from the chief's response is that as part of the second phase, we are going to be looking at external expertise to come in and help us look at our systems to identify the barriers. So we are working very hard internally as staff with human resources, equity, diversity, and human rights, and Toronto Employment and Social Services. We can expand our internal partners in that regard, but I do think it's critical that we bring in a third party experts to also help us.
Could it possibly be that there has not been sufficient outreach in Toronto of the nature that would garner people coming into the service, and how that would be determined? So I am very interested in somebody doing the scan and saying, here's what's happened, here's what hasn't, you haven't been here, you haven't been here, you've been to the fun fair, that we have very comprehensively understood that the plan that we were to have, which was to draw on underrepresented communities, and I would think, since we're paying a good dollar, yes, I'm wrapping up, that our first and foremost, when we have a chance, would be to ensure Torontonians, particularly marginalized Torontonians, would have access to good jobs. So I am really focused on this as a moment that needs to be figured out. And I don't feel, go ahead, I'll speak about it, but I'd like to have an
Through
undertaking.
you, Mr. Chair, we couldn't agree more, and we just need time to work together and to figure out what external experts and partners can work with us in trying to understand how we can better outreach to Torontonians and more diverse groups.
So will you bring that here then?
As the chief said, the plan is to bring that back.
Not the outreach plan, the fact as to what has been going on with outreach so far.
We will look at both what we've been doing in the past and how we're going to improve in the future.
All right. I just have a couple of quick questions. The coursework that firefighters are required to have, what is the estimated cost of the coursework?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it depends somewhat on the means by which someone does their education. When the province of Ontario transitioned to NFPA, it opened a number of different methodologies, all the way from a traditional community college route to hybrid. Community college route is tuition is approximately $10,000 to complete the NFPA 1001 they would require.
Is cost of tuition one of the barriers we should be looking at?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I will say possibly. We'll certainly look to our external partners to provide us that input. All of the community college programs with respect to qualification for the fire service are OSAP eligible, and I know that there is certainly one college and potentially others that offer bursary programs. That's also something we're working with Toronto Employment and Social Services on as well.
Okay, thank you. Speakers? Councillor Mihevc?
Thank you. I have a motion that I'd like to present. And, you know, I'm not speaking personally against anyone in the comments that I'm about to make, but I do want to be pretty clear. I don't find this report satisfactory in the least. We've been at this, I can't remember, certainly since amalgamation. So asking for more time, frankly, at this point, I don't think is acceptable. I really don't think is acceptable. When I think we need to, the deputy city manager needs to really engage this one on this issue of diversity within our fire department. When you have numbers as low as we have here that are totally out of whack with what our community looks like, that just is not on for a Toronto in the 21st century. We've been working on it, and I can remember the last time I guess it was September 17, 2015, when the fire chief commented up and down and backwards and forwards that this work was going to be done and it was imminent and he was going to report back and it was going to be really achieved. And what we get, frankly, there's no evidence that there's been any kind of culture change to allow what they say are their goals. So something's amiss, and I don't know what it is, but something's amiss here. So my hope with this motion is to say, come back. And no, you don't have half a year. You have 2 months. You have 2 months. You have March 7th, 2017. Come back with better data. I mean, how can we not have data? How many people here of this 54 that have been hired in the last year and a bit are from the Aboriginal community or First Nations? And how many are women? And how many are visible minorities? How come we don't have that data? How come we don't have benchmarks, which is something that was directed in the last report? What is the benchmark for each of the designated groups? We don't have that here either. And, you know, the strategies, I don't know, they're so high level, I don't feel I can touch them. So we need something that's very definitive, very proactive. The second motion actually asks I think they're typing it now as we speak. Oh, it's at the end. Okay. Oh, sorry, you combined it. Thank you. And further, that the fire chief and general manager consult with the deputy city manager and equity, diversity, and human rights staff to provide input and assist with the process. Like, I think, honestly, Juliana, I think you got to engage this with our access and equity and human rights staff. You know, we had similar issues for those who haven't perhaps been on council as long. We had the similar issues with the police department. Police department, then they got it, the penny dropped. They had a deputy police chief, and I forget the fella's name, who got it, and you know, you saw changes happening within a year. And that's the kind of effort and zeal that we need to kind of inspire and promote and push the fire department to be involved with. You know, I can't say that I'm really happy with this report. I'm happy that people are saying that they want to. But you know what? At this point, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And what's before us now is, frankly, not adequate. So that's my recommended motion, Mr. Chair.
Well, all right, thank you, Councillor Mihevc. Any other speakers? Any other motions?
I was going to scrap our motions because you're deferring it. I think that I will speak for a minute. I just want to say that I'm very impressed with Acting Chief Pegg and his willingness to take this issue and work on it. So I want to thank you for that. I can't see you through Councillor Mihevic's head, but I do want to thank you for that. And I want to say that in no way is this deferral a reflection on you. You've picked up a file that actually has been around since amalgamation and obviously has frustrated one councillor and many before him that there doesn't seem to be a plan. You've been very forthcoming today with these numbers, 19% from the 416, 81% from the 905, the type of outreach that's not being undertaken at the moment. Yet I think we've all thought there was actually some outreach. I would agree with Councillor Cole. There isn't a thoughtful outreach to get into certain communities. There is a fund-fair strategy, which is fine if we have the dollars for that, but it's not part of an outreach strategy for recruitment. I think there needs to be some sophisticated issues here. We need to do a survey. Why don't you think about being a firefighter? Did you ever think about that? What do you think's happening? I also think that based on the number of people that end up working for Toronto Fire, a survey of people about their workplace. Is it comfortable or is it culturally good for you? Do you have problems here? We find that people that are coming into bastions have a difficult time. We're seeing that in the police department. Despite their ambassador problem, women are having a difficult time. So this is the real world, 2016. There's real things to do. I also just want to comment on the relationship, I think it's great, with Tess, but that's only for people that are on OW, as we found out. In other words, you have to be receiving assistance in order to get assistance to get into, to get help to write the fairly expensive exams in order to be able to apply, Mr. Chair. So the CTS exams, the driver exams, all of those things, unless you are on Ontario Works, you can't get help. That, to me, is another big barrier. We're looking for people that, okay, if you're on Ontario Works, but what about those folks out there that are working 2 and 3 jobs, trying to get ahead, they're not on Ontario Works, they need the leg up as much as anybody else on Ontario Works. They don't have it. That's a systemic problem at the moment, and I know the Deputy City Manager has been working in order to try to overcome that in certain cases. So I think that this is a good idea, Councillor Mihevc, to send it back. I also know that while the DCM is here overseeing this committee, the manager for Toronto Fire is DCM Livy. So I'm assuming that they are going to be working very closely. Councillor Mihevc, I think your concerns should be made directly to the DCM who manages Toronto Fire, not DCM. No, it's a Cluster B function, and that when we have these situations, it always ends up being a little more difficult to right the boat, shall we say. So I support that. I don't want anyone to think that we're somehow, you're carrying how many years? 20 years from amalgamation and trying to fix something. It's not going to get fixed overnight. I hope you take this in the spirit in which it's being done, that we want to make sure that if we're turning a corner, that we're really turning a corner in a fundamental and deep way for our city and people who live in it having access to this great fire department and these great jobs that exist in the city of Toronto.
All right, thank you, Councillor Fletcher. We have the one motion. We're referring it back to staff. It's back to the drawing board. Of course, it's not a reflection of the hard work that's gone in so far. We just have to work harder. All those in favor? It's a motion of referral. Opposed? It's carried. So we're on 16.4. Now, Councillor Fletcher, were you going to
16.4, I have a
motion? There's a deputant, okay. But just to clarify, were you going to defer that item? We can still hear the deputant, but Dan Trace? Okay, motion defer?
Mr. Chair, consideration of this item be deferred until the previously requested report and the recommended changes to the city's process for assessing and improving municipal shelters is submitted, so all be submitted as one big package rather than piecemeal, for a bigger discussion.
Okay, all those in favor? It's carried. 16.8. Progress and implementation of Toronto Senior Strategy.
May I recommend we jump to 10 because there's a deputation and then he doesn't have to come back because it doesn't look like we're going to finish. by then.
I'll release 8, Mr. Chair, in the interest of time.
Council. Okay. Moving receipt. All those in favor? Receipt is moved. Number 10, we have a deputant, Arjun Sahato. Arjun Sehato.
Not here.
Not here?
Happy to move the staff recommendations, Mr. Chair, or someone else.
Staff recommendations are being moved. All those in favor? Carried. And item 11, it was a new item, a walk-on item. Councillor Fletcher has held the item. It is her motion.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I've been advised that there have to be a couple of changes in the recommendation I put forward, and the staff, the clerks have those motions to put up there. Nothing substantial. Just some timing issues as far as 2017. Q1, the status report that you recommended, and item 2 be broken down that the working group be the deputy city manager, the city solicitor, and that the deputy city manager would be inviting, I'm sorry, it should say the CEO of TCHC. I'm sorry, not representatives, if you don't mind, as was here. Toronto Police Service, I want the deputy chief. I'm sorry, it's exactly as written. So we'll just have to hold that down. The deputy chief, field operations, the mayor's office, the local councillor, and others are required. Of course, the CEO can bring whomever he might like, so could the deputy chief. I am insisting on this because this is very high level. So I'm sorry, Madam Clerk, I didn't read that closely enough. I thought it was exactly the same words.
All right, well.
Waiting for that to be, so I'm moving that. I'm sure it will be the same. I'd just like to speak for a minute, Mr. Chair, and thank you for allowing this urgent item of business on the agenda today. I've placed a motion in front of you after the second homicide within 3 months at the former Don Mel Court, current Rivertown, the first revitalized community undertaken by Toronto Community Housing. Since May, there have been 4 incidents of gun violence on the property, actually 5 when I go to the critical incident support reports that I've been given. as we all get them in our community, 2 homicides, 2 shootings on the street, 1 shooting in an apartment, and another homicide on another street affiliated with this Monroe Street in this very area. Before another person dies in Rivertown, those charged with leadership in housing, policing, and civic engagement must embrace a deep strategy that will bring an end to guns and gangs in Rivertown. We have to find a way to get rid of guns and gangs on this property and indeed many other properties. So I am moving today, and the Deputy City Manager has agreed, and I want to thank her very much for her leadership even before this terrible incident. She has been assisting and leading to try to get to the bottom of this situation and turn this ship around in this particular Toronto Community Housing community. And that she has agreed to undertake this as an urgent matter to get to the bottom of what currently is going on, current standards that are being used, some of the roadblocks to effectively dealing with tenant management, some of the shortcomings with just overall engagement in the community, and to report back on a status report by Q1 2017. There needs to be an updated operations plan in Rivertown to remove guns and gangs from that community. Since yesterday, I've been getting many letters. One, as TCHC, as Rivertown was developed as a revitalized community with condos and our RGI rebuilt on that site, 220 RGI units rebuilt, 188 market sale condos on that property. I now have a letter from the chair of Board of Directors, Toronto Corporation, Condo Corporation, 2065 Rivertown, asking for a meeting, high-level meeting with the police, with the city, and TCHC as to what is going on the street where they live across the street from a revitalized community, or what has been supposed to be a revitalized community. They want action. Other people up the street.
I'm going to have to either move, either wrap up, or we have to move a motion to extend.
I'll move to extend. I want to finish.
I'll move to extend to finish this item.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. People who live up the street, they want to know what's being done to help prevent future incidents. Then they want to support our neighbors south of Dundas who might be feeling vulnerable. What a thing to say, I'm worried about people that are feeling vulnerable. And the residents are feeling vulnerable. The families, the children, the residents are feeling vulnerable with all of these guns and gangs in Rivertown. TCHC residents want action. The rest of the community wants action. People want to know why this is happening and what we're doing about it. I unfortunately think that we've been in a business as usual mode for far too long. Since the first incident that took place exactly in February, then in April, then in May, a homicide in August, and a homicide in November. And yet no bells were ringing here. So I'm very thankful that the city has agreed to step up, take charge of this situation in this neighborhood. And quite frankly, as this says, this may be a framework for other neighborhoods that are experiencing this level of violence and this level of guns and gangs. Something is not being done in this community to alleviate this threat. It's only 220 units. It's not Regent Park with 2,000. 1/10 of the size with 2 homicides within 3 months. So I want to thank you, Deputy City Manager, for agreeing to take charge. And I'm expecting that everybody who you speak to will be very forthcoming, and we will be working together to shift this situation in Rivertown, because the residents of TCHC want it, the residents in the surrounding community want it, the city should want it, TCHC should want it, the police should want it. We need to fix this now.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. All those in favor? It's carried. Sure. Quarter.
All in favor of the motion? Councillor Cole, Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Pasternak, Councillor Bailao, and Councillor Mihevc.
Great. Thank you very much for bringing that forward, an extremely important topic in many communities across the city. And we are done. We are.
We should do the item as amended.
Oh, the item is amended? Okay. The item is amended. It's carried. And we are done. We are adjourned. Thank you very much. And special thanks to our clerk staff.